Hi, my name is Chip Vosick, and I'm Chief Technologist for StorageCraft. And today we're going to talk about dominating unstructured data. Now, I use the word dominate intentionally. I could have used control, I could have used managed, or any other number of words. But if I look at the definition of dominate, it's to have a commanding influence on, in this case, unstructured data. And the reality is, I don't think that anyone can argue that in the past, in the mid-market, that they have been able to have a commanding influence on unstructured data. Unstructured data is the part of anyone's data set that is growing the fastest right now. And unfortunately, storage vendors don't really have a solution to help you segregate out the blue area versus the green area. The green area is databases. It's VMs that are not Windows file servers. It's application servers. That typically stays flat over the course of time. But when you don't have a way of segregating out the unstructured data from your environment, most people will have Windows servers inside of their hypervisor, and it's bloating their storage requirements. It's creating ripple effects, and the fact that they have to back that up at intervals. It creates unnecessary network traffic, and I've got to have multiple copies of it off-site. And there's a lot of moving pieces and unnecessary expense and management. And the Fortune 1000 have for years segregated out this data, but there really hasn't been technology up to this point that the mid market and public entities could really afford, and so they chose to do it this other way with Windows servers. Regardless of who you are and what segment you are, you have an unstructured data footprint. Your footprint might look different depending on what your business is. If you're a public entity of some kind, you probably have a lot of videos. It's dash cam videos, it's body cam videos. And a lot of this stuff has to be kept for years. And if it's ever compromised and it's part of a case, that's not good. If you're an engineering firm, you have a lot of CAD files and things like that. A lot of times that stuff has to be kept for years, especially if it's related to buildings or federal contracts and whatnot. That data has its own long life cycle. And just in general, in the commercial space, office type documents, contracts, PDFs, other types of data, that stuff usually has a 7-year retention, if not longer, depending on what it's associated with. And then that has its own set of challenges in how you protect that. Healthcare has images and those types of files. Even advertising agencies have a lot of video. I see a lot of churches with a lot of 4K video because they record every one of the sermons. It's everybody's data footprint looks different, but I would encourage you to go back after this event and ask the questions of how much unstructured data do we have. A great place to start is how many VMs do you have? How many services do I have running that are basic Windows file servers, and how big are those VMs? And then how big is the whole of my data? I bet at least half, if not more, of your data footprint is locked up in the stuff you've got to keep for years, and it's somebody's Word file or some photo for something, and it does not fit inside of a database or part of some kind of an application. But from StorageCraft's perspective, this has turned into an interesting opportunity for us. StorageCraft's about a 15-year-old company, and storage is not our core competency. Our core competency really is around backup and recovery. Our backup software dates back to the mid 2000s or so. And it's mostly been used in the MSP community. We own about 70% of the MSP footprint for people who have managed backup practices. They're using our core Shadow Protect product. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we made an acquisition of a storage company, and we did some modernization on the code. And as we went to market with it, and couple that with some of the other market forces that are going on around ransomware, what has happened is an interesting niche for this product that we're having to pivot into. And that really starts with, and here as of late, the phishing attacks that have gotten to be more and more aggressive and more elegant. I'll share a story with you on kind of why this is accelerating at the pace that it is. We've seen several examples now of customers getting hit with ransomware, and they come in on some type of a very elegant phishing attack like this right here. I show this one because it nearly got me. But once they get in and they get into your network, and what they're looking for is your backup software. And once they find your backup software, they put a keylogger in. And once they got your credentials to your backup software, they go in, they lock everybody else out. And then they go in and they delete all your old backups. They delete all your old retentions. The idea is to wipe out your footprint of your backups. There's evidence to suggest that they're doing the same thing with your backup devices. If you're using a consumer grade NAS device of some kind, there's evidence to support that they're brute force entering those and trying to get to your backups as well. But the reality, so once they can identify that they have gotten rid of all your backups, then they hit you with ransomware. And we've seen tremendous amounts of data loss as it relates to this type of attack alone. And these are not attacks in big cities. These are attacks in East Texas. They're attacks in Alabama. They're attacks in places where you may not have the security procedures and two-factor authentication and some of the things you see. So it's real and it's out there. So how do we fix it? Well, number one, I can't stop you from getting hit by ransomware. If they want in, they're going to get in. They're going to figure out a way. But what we can do is we can kind of limit the number of ways that they can get in. The first place to do that is to limit the attack points. So we would suggest to get rid of all of your Windows-based file servers. Think about all the patching and downtime, reboots, everything associated with Windows services goes away when you start to look at that conversation. And our product would integrate natively with Active Directory, and it would take on the personas of all those for those file shares. But also then you get an automation feature through the form of continuous data protection. So every 90 seconds, all the folders get a snapshot, and all that data gets put into a hidden folder. That hidden folder is immutable to ransomware. You can't augment any of the data inside of that folder. So if you have a user that creates a file and deletes it and calls help desk, says I need that file back, you'd be able to restore the latest 90-second copy of it. If that was part of if your backups were in that folder and you got hit with something, you could go restore those from 90 seconds ago. And you can keep versions of them up to infinite. I don't know that you would, but you can keep as many copies as you want. You can roll back in the event that something was a time bomb. But also there's compression and deduplication to try to reduce the storage footprint in general. That's a feature you really don't get with a Windows type environment, is automations to compress what it can and dedupe what it can. If somebody goes out and saves the 401k file 100 times, or the 401k plan 100 times, it's only going to save the one copy. Office documents compress pretty well. Videos do not, but it's going to try to reduce the footprint as best that it can. What about long-term archive of storage? Then I got to keep these files for 7 years or infinite, whatever. What about the cloud? Well, the cloud's great, but what you really want is the cloud economics. You want that 5 cents a gig or whatever, but you want the convenience of on-premise. The bill starts rolling when you start pulling that data back. So have an environment where you have a cloud economics, and it's the same economics we're talking about the same systems on the primary as we are for long-term. This is just a secondary use case of it. But be able to grow that out and have a predictable cost. And then, because it's on premise, consider something like encrypting the drives so that somebody can't walk off with them. And maybe you have compliance concerns, FIPS and whatnot. But what that allows you to do by taking this type of approach is divorce yourself from traditional storage vendor gamesmanship. Now, I've sold storage for 20 plus years. And that first slide that I put up that was part of the graph, that's how we would address every one of our customers. We'd go in and say, how much storage do you need today? And let's look at some kind of a growth rate. Let's put you on a 3-year purchase plan, and I'm going to give you a killer deal. The problem with that is if you guess wrong and you need more storage, you're going to buy the next upgrade at retail. You're going to buy any additional drives or shelves at retail. Why would you do that when you can segregate out that data, make the deal that you can on that structured data piece, but on the unstructured, get an environment where you can dynamically grow it at tomorrow's prices. Buy what you need today, and then tomorrow, when you need to expand, you can buy at tomorrow's prices and dynamically expand all the shares in question and create kind of this flexible ecosystem for all of this data that's in question here. And then what about backups? A lot of people have a secondary backup environment. They have like a purpose-built backup appliance of some kind. Converge that. Think about putting your backups into the same environment and have it benefit from the same technologies, like continuous data protection, that dedupe, compression. Compress what you can, dedupe what you can, and use something like two-factor authentication to prevent someone from, in the earlier example, trying to get to where the backups are stored through some type of brute force. 2FA kind of stops all of that. So use some automation like that. And then I'll plug my backup software for just a second. If you're out there and you're still doing a weekly full and a daily incremental, we've been doing 15-minute interval backups since day one. And with the ability to be able to take that last backup and be able to spin it up into a read-writable VM, either through VirtualBox, VMware, or Hyper-V. And we'll get into a little bit more about our backup software and how we've modernized that. But certainly, if maybe this other topic doesn't speak to you, if you're still doing weekly fulls and daily incrementals, we should probably talk. So from a simplification perspective, now we've reduced the number of moving pieces in your environment, all the Windows servers. This is how someone would manage it. It's a single pane of glass. You can look at the health of the systems. You can provision and set up all of your shares, set up your retention schedules on a share-by-share basis. This is how you would add additional storage. It's all through a single pane of glass that actually is also the same interface that we use for our backup software. So let's talk about a next step. We've talked about the data center and about how to store the data. We haven't really talked about all the other places where you might have a footprint. Two different things to consider now as we move forward. At a branch office, and let's say a branch office being anywhere with more than 10 nodes of compute of some kind. Let's just make some kind of a brief definition. We have our backup software, ShadowSafe, that would run locally there. And then those backups would be able to be transported back to headquarters and stored on something like OneSafe. Now remember, we might use OneSafe as well for unstructured data, or we might create a separate ring and quarantine it off into its own backup environment with a lot of flexibility in how you would deploy a OneSafe as a backup target, either standalone or in conjunction with being a file server as well. But then we've just also announced a new product called OneSafe Solo. And these are for locations where you have less than 5 to 10 compute nodes out there of some kind, or VMs. Think about a dentist office, a retail site of some kind. If you're in oil and gas, maybe you're a drilling site, an oil site, an offshore rig, where you would have a device that you would ship to that location, because a lot of times when you have these locations, they're in places that you necessarily don't want to drive to, and you may not have personnel there that can set it up, and you certainly don't want to send someone. You would send this device to them, they would plug it into the network, and then you'd be able to start remotely configuring the backups for that environment and bring those backups back to headquarters as well, and have a very elegant way of being able to do it all through a central interface and be able to see all of that. You set up your SLAs, maybe SQL databases, Oracle databases, and high performing other type of business applications. Maybe I set that up on an every 15-minute schedule. Maybe I set up an SLA where for my branch offices, it's every hour I do a backup. Maybe at the remote locations, it's every day. You can set up policies through the single pane of glass. And I don't know if you noticed, but it looks identical to the one system because it's all the same interface. You manage the backups and you manage the storage all through one single pane of glass. And really, there's only really we need one person to manage all of this. But you can get all kinds of capacity reports, set up your schedules, do your restores, all of this through a single pane of glass management. Here's a little thing so from a OneSafe Solo, Hyper-V, vCenter, ESXi, or any physical. Physical is important because there are a lot of places that still have, especially in remote sites, some kind of physical footprint, and very difficult to back those up. And through an agent-based approach, we'd be able to back those up with the OneSafe Solo, and then that would roll up into one system from a management perspective back to headquarters. Let's talk a little bit about a real use case so this is a client that's about 45 miles north of Amarillo. So I don't know if you're sitting out there and thinking, well, I don't know if I can really afford this. I throw this example up because if anybody can afford this solution, it's this guy. And if Amarillo is in the middle of nowhere, this guy's 45 minutes north of there. This town has no stoplights in it. This data center is on the top of a courthouse. There are water pipes everywhere because they converted it back. It used to be the vault for the county. They converted it to a data center, and a lot of potential there for not the most ideal situation, put it that way. So, but nonetheless, he was a previous StorageCraft customer and was using our backup software for the desktops. So he was backing up about 100 desktops to all of those Buffalo NASs that you see there. In exploring kind of his environment, this is what we found out. He's also running a Hyper-V environment with only 3 VMs. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you break down what those 3 VMs are, his total backup was 20 terabytes for those 3 VMs. He had one of those VMs that was a Windows file server, and it was 16 terabytes in size. Now that's where they kept all the county records, all the other stuff going on with the county, but that was all that unstructured data that's pertinent to, maintaining the county. So and then he was backing that up with the Unitrends device that was sitting on the top of this rack. His 4th year of maintenance for Unitrends came up, and we were able to work with him to consolidate all of those NAS devices for all of the 100 backups that he's doing for his desktops. All of those backups are going to go to the OneSafe device. His Hyper-V environment, we're actually going to consolidate out that one VM, and we're going to put all that data on this and integrate it with AD, and serve out that 16 terabytes of data through the OneSafe system. We're also then going to put a couple of agents on the Hyper-V and back those up directly to this device. So in that one 2U device, we're going to replace what was a half of rack of compute and storage and power and cooling and noise for what 1 year of Unitrends, a 3-year deal. So if you go back and look at what your expenses are going to be over the next 3 years, or even what your 4th year of maintenance is going to be on something, you're going to spend money. I would encourage you to look at how you can maximize that money. Even though you may not have budgets, you have things that are coming up for renewal, and this is a perfect spot for us to look at some type of a consolidation play and look at what your expenses are going to be over the course of the next 3 years or so, and roll that into a return on investment of why something like this might make sense. And this is just, this is a very typical example. We have another example where a casino in Alabama has thousands of cameras, and they have very expensive NAS arrays that are feeding all of this. But in their example, they, an incident happens on the casino floor. They have to keep that video for 5 years. And so they purchased OneSafe to kind of create a long-term archive for that video and get it out of that primary environment so that they don't have to chew up expensive storage and back it up and replicate and all of that. They have their own separate ecosystem. So a lot of different manifestations. The last example I'll give you is we had a client that figured out about a year ago that this ransomware attack that I kind of gave as an example early on, that was a possibility in his own environment as well as in others. And so he actually deployed a OneSafe as a air gap solution. And he doesn't join it to Active Directory. He gives it very limited access. From an admin perspective, all the shares are hidden. But he has a normal backup environment, but he also streams a secondary copy to our OneSafe device. And the idea there being that this is an air gap in the fact that something goes horribly wrong and all of his backups get corrupted. He has one spot where all of his backups are that are being protected by these snapshots that are off the network, that you're not joined to AD, and he can get to all of his data. So would encourage you to, I know I probably more questions than I answered, but engage us in the chat. Everybody's example is different. We're going to ask you a bunch of questions about what your environment is. It's a consultative sell. Everybody's implementation of this looks differently. And whether you buy the software, the backup software or not, we can put it together. We can piece it out. It's not an all or none. We could just say the backup software, or we can just say the storage, or we could just say the solo. You're not bound to have to put I'm just showing the power of putting it all together. and the economies there. But I would encourage you to engage us in conversation. Let us talk to you about it. We're here to help. We're not here to sell. And let us help you in your organization maximize your dollar spend, especially in these critical times when I know budget dollars are few and far between. But you are spending money. You just need to kind of figure out where that money is and how you might apply that money in other areas. Look forward to speaking with everyone. Thanks.